There is a shelf in the Vatican Apostolic Archive that no one was permitted to touch until this week. The folder is thin, maybe 40 pages. It was sealed in the spring of 1931, with an instruction that it not be opened for 90 years. That window passed quietly in 2021. The actual unsealing happened only days ago. Inside is a confession, handwritten, in 2 languages given by a man who admitted to eating human flesh, and to something worse than that. The church kept it locked away for a reason. We're about to find out what. Start with the box. It's gray, acid-free, unremarkable, the kind that holds millions of documents beneath Vatican City in a collection that runs, by the Holy See's own estimate, to roughly 53 miles of shelving. Most of it is dull. Property records, marriage dispensations, letters about cathedral roofs. But scattered through those miles are folders marked with a Latin instruction meaning, roughly, do not open. This one carried a date, 1931, and a second date 90 years on when it could finally be read. Archivists describe the moment of unsealing as anticlimactic: a gloved hand, a paper knife, a faint smell of old wax. What emerged was a deposition taken from a man identified only by initials and a place, a coastal mission in West Africa, in a region the document calls a trading station. He was dying when he gave it. The priest who recorded his words noted that fact in the margin, in a hand that grows more unsteady toward the end. The man was not confessing to clear his conscience. He was confessing because he believed he was already damned and wanted one person to know why. The first line of his statement reads simply, "It began with the ship that would not leave." Here's where the story turns, and not in the direction you think. The man giving the confession was not African. He was European, a former crewman by his own account, on a slaving vessel. And this is the part that resets everything. We tend to imagine the Atlantic slave trade as a closed chapter, ended by the 1860s. But this confession is dated 1931, describing events the man places decades earlier, in the dying, illegal years of a trade that officially no longer existed. The transatlantic slave trade, the forced transport of enslaved African people to the Americas, beginning with the first Portuguese voyage to Brazil in 1526, did not stop cleanly when laws were passed. It went underground. Ships still ran the coast, and the men who crewed them carried memories they could not put down. The Portuguese, the document reminds us, built barracoons, holding pens on the African coast, where newly purchased captives were gathered to wait for the next ship. The vast majority of the enslaved came from West and Central Africa. This man had stood inside one of those barracoons. What he confessed had nothing to do with the captives below decks. It had to do with what happened when the ship itself became the prison for the crew. The North European method of slaving had a flaw the confession exposes with brutal clarity. Unlike the Portuguese, who loaded captives from coastal barracoons and left quickly, the British and Dutch traders often used the ship itself as the gathering base. They would anchor off the coast and wait, sometimes for months, buying captives a few at a time from West and Central African slave merchants until the hold was full. This meant the ship sat and sat. The first captives bought endured the longest confinement of all, but so did the crew, trapped on a vessel going nowhere in waters thick with disease. The man's confession describes one such ship, becalmed and provisioned for a voyage that kept being delayed. The fresh water spoiled. The salted meat ran out. Fever moved through the crew faster than through the hold. He names 3 other sailors, only first names survive, and describes them dying in sequence over 11 days. "We could not bury them in the sea," he wrote, "because we were forbidden to draw attention. An illegal ship cannot announce a death. It cannot signal for help, so the bodies stayed aboard, and the men who remained grew hungrier." He does not write the next sentence directly. He leaves a blank line, then he begins again, "I will tell the Father what we did." The confession itself runs only 6 paragraphs. They are flat, factual, almost clinical, which is what makes them unbearable. He describes the decision the surviving crew made on the 14th day. He uses the word meat. He records that 2 men refused and that one of those 2 was later found drowned. and that he does not know whether the man jumped or was pushed. He writes that they continued for 9 days. He writes that when a Portuguese vessel finally appeared on the horizon, the survivors threw the remains overboard and said nothing, and that the rescuers, seeing the state of the crew, asked no questions. This is the detail that historians who have now read the document find most chilling, not the cannibalism itself. Cases of starvation cannibalism at sea are grimly documented across maritime history. It's the silence around it. The trade was illegal. The ship could not exist on paper, so neither could what happened on it. The men who survived simply walked back into the world and never spoke of it except this one, decades later, dying at a mission, unable to carry it alone. "I have eaten Christian and African both," he confessed, "and before God they tasted the same." The priest underlined that line. We don't know why. So why did this end up beneath the Vatican, sealed for 90 years? The answer lies in who recorded it. The priest was a missionary, and under canon law a confession given in the context of the sacrament carries the seal and absolute, unbreakable confidentiality. A priest may not reveal what is confessed ever, under any circumstance. But this was not a sacramental confession in the ordinary sense. It was a deposition, written down, signed, witnessed. That put the church in an impossible position. The document contained an admission of homicide and the consumption of human remains, tied to an illegal slaving operation that European governments officially claimed had ended. Releasing it would have implicated a network. Destroying it would have violated the church's own obsession with preservation. So they did the third thing. They sealed it, they sent it to Rome, and they set a date so far in the future that everyone who could be harmed by it would be long dead. 90 years is not an accident. It is roughly the maximum span of a human life. The church was not hiding the truth forever. It was waiting for everyone the truth could touch to die first. That is a kind of mercy. It is also a kind of burial. When researchers cross-checked the confession this week, a problem surfaced. The man named 3 dead crewmates and 1 rescue vessel. 2 of those names appear nowhere in any shipping registry, which is expected, because illegal ships kept no honest records. But 1 name does appear. A Portuguese vessel matching the description in the confession is logged in a port record arriving on the West African coast in the right window, listed as carrying distressed mariners. That single line in a customs ledger is the only independent thread that ties this confession to the real world. It means at least part of what the dying man said can be corroborated, and it raises a harder question. If the rescue happened, the rescuers existed. If the rescuers existed, others knew. The confession may have been one man's secret, but the event was not. Somewhere in the archives of 3 countries, there may be more documents, manifests, letters, port logs, that nobody has connected because nobody knew to look. The Vatican folder didn't just reveal a crime. It revealed a gap. A blank space in the official history of the slave trade's final, lawless years, where ships vanished and men did things the records were never meant to hold. There is one more thing in the folder, and it is the part the researchers keep returning to. The priest's marginal notes. He recorded the man's physical decline, weaker today, could not finish, asked for water and forgiveness in the same breath. But at the very bottom of the final page, after the confession ends, the priest wrote a single sentence that was not part of the deposition. A private note. It reads, "He asked me whether the men they ate were free or enslaved, and whether it mattered to God. I did not answer him." Sit with that. In the dying years of a trade that turned human beings into cargo, a starving sailor's last question was not whether what he'd done was wrong. It was whether the distinction the entire trade was built on, free or enslaved, owned or not, meant anything at the end. The priest, a man whose job was to have answers, had none. He left the question open, and the church left it sealed for 90 years, perhaps because no one had a better answer than the priest did. The confession is back on its gray shelf now, but the question it carried is loose in the world again, and it does not have a sealing date. One document, 94 years of silence. And a question a dying man asked that no one could answer. The slave trade ended in the records long before it ended in reality, And somewhere, more sealed folders are waiting for their dates to pass. So we'll ask you what the priest couldn't answer. Did it matter? Tell us below. Subscribe to Obscura Files, turn on notifications, and we'll keep opening the things others buried. There's always another shelf.